"It's just dirt, Emily." Her ex-husband sneered through the phone as she handed over her last $400 for a foreclosed, barren wasteland. He thought she was throwing her life away. He didn't know that beneath that dead, cracked soil lay $130 million waiting to be unearthed. Emily Stanton stared at the rusted chain-link fence that bordered the 43 acres of Pike County, Arkansas, with a knot in her stomach that felt like swallowed glass. It was August, and the midday sun was merciless, baking the earth into a pale, cracked mosaic that looked entirely hostile to life. Beside her, her 8-year-old son Leo kicked at a dried clump of mud. It didn't break. It just skittered across the hard pan like a billiard ball. 3 weeks ago, Emily had been living in a cramped, mold-infested apartment in Little Rock, working double shifts at a diner, just to keep the lights from being shut off. Her ex-husband, Greg Mitchell, a mid-level insurance adjuster, who had traded her and Leo in for a 23-year-old personal trainer, paid exactly $0 in child support. His lawyers had tied her up in so much red tape, she had simply given up fighting. Desperation does strange things to a person's logic. When Emily saw the public notice for a county tax default auction, she didn't see a gamble. She saw an escape hatch. She had exactly $650 in her savings account. She wanted to farm. She had grown up helping her grandfather in his sprawling vegetable gardens, and she held a naive, desperate belief that if she just had some land, she could grow enough heirloom tomatoes, squash and corn to sell at farmers' markets, and build a quiet, safe life for Leo. At the Pike County Courthouse, the auctioneer, a sweaty man named Wayne Garrison, had blown through properties she couldn't afford. Then came Parcel 88, the old O'Connor tract, abandoned for 19 years, taxes unpaid. "Do I hear 500? Wayne had droned. Silence. 400. Emily's hand shot up before her brain could stop it. For $400 she bought a farm, or at least what was supposed to be a farm. The reality of Parcel 88 was staring her in the face. The farmhouse mentioned in the county records had burned down a decade ago, leaving only a blackened stone chimney protruding from a tangle of invasive briars. Their new home was a dented 1970s Airstream trailer parked near the property line, left behind by squatters. It smelled of mildew and old mice, but it had a roof. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Greg. She hesitated, then answered. "I saw the county registry online." Greg's voice dripped with his trademark condescension. "You actually bought it. You moved my son to a toxic waste dump." "It's not a dump, Greg," Emily said, shielding her eyes against the glare. "It's a farm. We're going to till it next week." Greg let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Till what I looked up the geological survey, Emily. The soil is mostly clay and volcanic rock. Nothing has grown there since the 90s. You blew your last few dimes on a litter box in the middle of nowhere. It's just dirt, Emily. But sure have fun playing pioneer." He hung up, leaving Emily listening to the dead air. She swallowed hard, blinking back hot tears. She looked at Leo, who was happily chasing a grasshopper through the weeds. "I will make this work," she promised herself. "I have to." The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in agony. Emily spent $150 of her remaining $250 on a beat-up, sputtering walk behind rototiller from a local hardware store. She woke up at dawn every day, wrapping her hands in athletic tape to prevent blisters, and went to war with the earth. But Greg had been right about one thing: the dirt was bizarre. It wasn't the rich, loamy brown soil she remembered from her grandfather's garden. Beneath a thin, deceptive layer of topsoil, the ground turned into a weird, bluish-green, crumbly rock. When the tiller blades hit it, the machine bucked and screamed, nearly tearing Emily's shoulders out of their sockets. Day after day, The Arkansas sun beat down on her back, turning her skin a dark, leathery brown. Her muscles ached so deeply she couldn't sleep at night. She managed to carve out a quarter-acre plot, planting seeds with hands that were cracked and bleeding, desperately watering them from a functioning well she had miraculously managed to prime. But the seeds didn't take. The few fragile green shoots that dared to break the surface quickly withered and died, suffocated by the heavy alkaline nature of the bluish soil. By the end of September, Emily's bank account was at zero. They were living off cheap rice-canned beans and the charity of a local food pantry. One evening, sitting on the metal steps of the airstream, Emily watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. Her hands rested in her lap, shaking slightly from exhaustion. She had failed. The land had broken her. She was going to have to call Greg and beg him for money, beg him to let them move into his guest room. The thought made her physically nauseous. "Mom," Emily looked down. Leo was standing there, covered in the strange blue-grey mud from the freshly dug trenches. "I'm sorry, baby," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. "I think we have to go back to the city." "But look what I found," Leo said, holding out a small, grubby fist. "It's a glass pebble. Can I keep it?" Emily sighed, holding out her palm. Leo dropped the object into her hand. It was about the size of a jelly bean, but heavy. It wasn't smooth like glass, but rough-shaped somewhat like two pyramids stuck base to base. It was coated in the stubborn blue dirt, but where Leo had rubbed it clean on his shirt, it caught the dying light of the sun, refracting it into a startling sharp glint. It felt strange to the touch, slick, almost greasy. Emily frowned, rubbing her thumb over the sharp edge of the stone. "Where did you find this, Leo?" "In the big ditch you dug." He pointed toward her failed tomato patch. "There's a lot of weird rocks in there." Emily stared at the stone. A cold electric prickle started at the base of her neck and traveled down her spine. She wasn't a geologist, but she knew Pike County had a history. The crater of Diamond State Park was only 20 miles away. She closed her fist around the stone, the sharp edges digging into her blistered palm. "Get washed up, Leo," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "We're going into town tomorrow." The town of Murfreesboro was small, sleepy, and built entirely around the mythology of striking it rich. Storefronts boasted diamond panning kits and cheap gemstone souvenirs. Emily bypassed the tourist traps and parked her rattling Honda Civic outside a heavily barred pawn and jewelry shop on the edge of Town Gable's fine jewels and appraisals. Arthur Gable was a man who looked like he had been carved out of a walnut. He had thin white hair, thick glasses, and the permanent scowl of a man who spent his life telling hopeful tourists that their diamonds were actually just clear quartz crystals. The bell above the door jingled as Emily walked in, clutching her purse tightly. Leo stayed close to her side. "If you're here to show me something you dug up at the state park, it's $10 for an appraisal, and I'll tell you right now it's quartz," Arthur muttered, without looking up from the watch he was repairing. "I didn't find it at the park," Emily said. She reached into her purse, unwrapped the paper towel she had carefully folded, and placed the stone on the glass counter. Arthur sighed, putting down his tiny screwdriver. He picked up a jeweler's loop, screwed it into his right eye, and picked up the stone with a pair of tweezers. Emily held her breath. She watched Arthur's mouth. For 10 seconds he didn't move. Then the tweezers began to tremble. Just a fraction, but she saw it. Arthur lowered the stone, took out his loop, and stared at Emily. He didn't say a word. He walked to the front door, flipped the sign from open to closed, turned the deadbolt, and pulled down the window shade. "Who else knows you have this?" Arthur's voice was suddenly very quiet, dropping an octave. "Just me and my son," Emily said, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What is it?" Arthur brought the stone over to a specialized microscope. He clicked on a harsh, white light. Ma'am, quartz has a specific gravity of 2.6. This stone is much denser. It has an octahedral crystal habit and what we call an adamantine luster. It feels greasy because of how the carbon bonds interact with oils on your skin. He looked up, his eyes wide behind his thick lenses. This is a diamond, a type 2, a flawless white rough diamond. It's roughly 4 carats. Given its perfect crystalline structure and lack of nitrogen impurities, if this is cut properly, you are looking at a stone worth at least $60,000. Emily's knees gave out. She gripped the edge of the glass counter to keep from collapsing. $60,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was a new car. It was a house deposit. It was salvation. "You found this on your property?" Arthur asked intently. "Yes, in the dirt. The soil it's weird. It's blue and crumbly." Arthur's face went completely pale. "Blue ground," he whispered. "Kimberlite. Or lamproite. Dear God." He grabbed a landline phone from behind the counter. "Mr. Stanton, I need you to trust me. You cannot sell this stone yet, and you cannot tell anyone where you found it. I am calling a friend of mine, Dr. Leonard Hastings. He's a retired geologist from the Arkansas Geological Survey." "Why?" Emily panicked, clutching Leo's shoulder. "I just want to sell it. I need the money." "Because," Arthur said, dialing the rotary numbers furiously, "if you found a 4-carat flawless diamond sitting in exposed blue ground on your property, you didn't just find a stray gem washed downstream. You found the source. You found the pipe." 2 days later, Emily's farm was no longer just a farm. It was a covert geological black site. Dr. Leonard Hastings, a tall, stringy man with a wild beard and eyes that burned with academic fervor, arrived under the cover of night in an unmarked truck. For 48 hours he took core samples, ran chemical soil tests in a portable lab in his truck bed, and mapped the boundaries of the bluish-green dirt that Emily had cursed and bled over. On the 3rd evening, Dr. Hastings sat at the small dinette table inside Emily's Airstream. He looked exhausted, terrified, and elated all at once. "Ms. Stanton," Hastings said, laying out a topographic map of her 43 acres. "Diamonds are formed hundreds of miles below the Earth's surface. They are brought up by violent, deep-source volcanic eruptions. The magma from these eruptions cools into a carrot-shaped pipe of rock called lamproite. The crater of Diamonds Park is one such pipe." He tapped a red circle he had drawn over the center of Emily's property. "You bought parcel 88. According to my core samples, your property sits directly on top of an entirely separate, undiscovered lamproite pipe. It's nearly 8 acres across. The blue dirt you've been trying to plant tomatoes in? It's weathered lamproite, heavily saturated with raw diamond ore. Your son found a 4-carat stone on the surface. Based on the density of the indicator minerals I found, garnets, spinels, and phlogopite. This pipe is incredibly rich." Emily stared at him, the words buzzing in her ears. "Rich, what does that mean? How much?" Dr. Hastings took a deep breath. "To give you an exact number requires deep excavation. But based on the surface yield and the volume of the pipe, we are talking about a deposit that could easily yield over $130 million in raw diamonds." Emily couldn't breathe. The air in the trailer felt thin, metallic. 130 million. The words were abstract, absurd. She looked out the small, dirty window of the trailer at the dark, barren dirt she had hated so deeply just days ago. "It's just dirt, Emily. We need to secure the perimeter," Hastings warned, snapping her back to reality. "We need to file a mining claim with the state immediately. The second this leaks, every vulture in the corporate mining sector is going to descend on you. You need a lawyer." Hastings was right, but he was already too late. The next morning, Emily was awakened, not by the sunrise, but by the deep, aggressive crunch of heavy tires on her gravel driveway. She stepped out of the Airstream, wrapping a frayed cardigan around her shoulders, the cool October morning air biting at her skin. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade was parked near her broken rototiller. Two men in sharp-tailored suits stepped out. They looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of the dead briars and the rusted fencing. The lead man was tall, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, grey eyes. "Emily Stanton?" the man asked, walking toward her with easy, predatory confidence. "Who are you? You're trespassing," Emily said, standing her ground, though her hands were shaking in her pockets. "My name is Jonathan Hayes," the man said, pulling a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. "I represent Caliber Mining Corporation. We heard a very interesting rumor from a lab tech down at the state registry regarding some soil samples submitted under a blind trust yesterday." Emily's blood ran cold. Hastings had tried to rush the paperwork, but someone had talked. "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily lied, her voice tight. "Get off my property." Hayes smiled, a slow, pitying expression. He opened the folder and pulled out a crisp legal document with a gold seal at the bottom. "You see, Miss Stanton, we did a little digging into Parcel 88, Hayes said smoothly. "You bought this land at a county tax default auction for $400. A brilliant investment. Truly. You hold the deed to the surface." He took a step closer, handing her the document. Emily took it, her eyes scanning the dense legalese, catching on the words, "severance of mineral estate." "Unfortunately," Hayes whispered, his eyes locking onto hers, "in the state of Arkansas, mineral rights can be severed from surface rights. The previous owner, Mr. O'Connor, sold the subterranean mineral rights of this exact parcel to a subsidiary of Caliber Mining in 1982 to pay off a gambling debt. You own the dirt, Ms. Stanton, but we own everything that's underneath it. And we're bringing the bulldozers tomorrow." Emily stared at the document in Jonathan Hayes's manicured hands, the crisp white paper fluttering slightly in the Arkansas morning breeze. The words, "severance of mineral estate," blurred together. A cold nausea twisted in her gut. She had spent her last $400 to escape her ex-husband's control, only to hand her life over to a faceless corporation. "You can't just come in here and destroy my land," Emily said, her voice shaking, though she forced her chin up. "I live here. My son lives here. I sympathize, Ms. Stanton, I truly do," Hayes replied smoothly, his smile entirely devoid of warmth. "But property law is absolute. We have the legal right to extract our minerals. We will, of course, compensate you for surface damages. I believe the standard rate for unarable pasture in Pike County is about $200 an acre. We'll bring you a check for $8,000. You can buy a very nice used car to pull that Airstream off our job site." He tipped his head slightly, tapped the folder against his leg, and turned back to his Escalade. "Be packed by tomorrow morning. The heavy machinery arrives at dawn." Emily watched the black SUV kick up a cloud of grey dust as it sped away. Her legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the metal step of the trailer, burying her face in her calloused hands. She had lost. Again. 2 hours later, Dr. Leonard Hastings arrived, slamming his truck door so hard the side mirror rattled. He took one look at Emily's face and the copy of the severance deed she held, and his academic demeanor vanished, replaced by a fierce, gritty anger. "Those corporate vultures," Hastings spat, pacing the dirt. "They monitor the state registry like hawks, but they think you're just some ignorant girl they can bulldoze. They don't know who they're dealing with." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "I know a man, a land rights attorney out of Fayetteville. His name is Harrison Cole. He hates mining conglomerates more than he hates taxes. I'm calling him." Harrison Cole arrived at dusk. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, wearing cowboy boots and a rumpled linen suit, carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He didn't offer comforting words. He just took the deed, sat at Emily's tiny dinette table, and began reading under the flickering light of the trailer's singular bulb. For 45 minutes, the only sound was the rustling of paper and the distant hum of crickets. Finally, Harrison looked up, a sharp, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Hayes is a bully, and like all bullies, he's relying on you being too terrified to read the fine print." Harrison rumbled, his voice like gravel. "Arkansas law recognizes the severance of mineral rights. If there's coal or oil 1,000 feet down, Caliber Mining owns it. But—" Harrison tapped a thick finger against a specific clause. "The 1982 deed specifies subsurface vein and seam extraction. It does not grant them the right to strip mine." Emily frowned. "What does that mean for me?" "It means—" Harrison leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "We are dealing with the surface destruction test. Decades of property case law dictate that if a company has to completely destroy the surface of the land to get to their minerals, the surface owner can block them. But it gets better, Emily. Look out that window. Where did you find that diamond?" "In the dirt," Emily said. "In the trench I dug for the tomatoes." "Exactly. The lamprod pipe didn't just push minerals up near the surface. It weathered and became the surface. That blue ground isn't a deep subterranean vein. It is the literal topsoil. Legally, they cannot claim the dirt you walk on. You don't just own the farm, Emily. The farm is the diamond mine." The next morning, the ground shook. Emily stood at the edge of her property line, holding Leo's hand tightly. Down the 2-lane county highway, a procession of massive yellow bulldozers and excavators was rolling toward Parcel 88, flanked by Jonathan Hayes in his black Escalade. Hayes stepped out, looking exasperated. "Miss Stanton, I warned you." He was cut off by the scream of tires. Harrison Cole's truck swerved onto the dirt road, blocking the gate. Harrison stepped out, waving a manila envelope of his own. "Jonathan Hayes." Harrison barked, walking right up to the corporate fixer. "I have an emergency injunction signed by a Pike County judge at 6 a.m. this morning. Your mineral deed is completely unenforceable without destroying my client's surface estate. If one of those tractor treads crosses this fence line, I will have the sheriff arrest you for criminal trespass, and I will sue Caliber Mining for predatory intimidation." Hayes's smug expression cracked. He snatched the injunction, his eyes darting over the judge's signature. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, furious red. He glared at Emily, the facade of the polite businessman completely gone. "You think you can beat a billion-dollar company with a dirt lawyer and a technicality?" Hayes hissed. "We have unlimited resources. We will bury you in litigation until you are homeless." "Get off my dirt," Emily said, her voice eerily calm. Hayes signaled the heavy machinery to back up. But as he climbed into his SUV, he made a phone call. Emily couldn't hear what he was saying, but she saw the vicious smirk return to his face. She didn't know it yet, but Caliber Mining was about to switch tactics. If they couldn't take the land legally, they would take the person who owned it. 3 days later, Emily received a knock on the Airstream door. It was a process server. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. It wasn't from Caliber Mining. It was from family court. Her ex-husband, Greg Mitchell, was suing for full emergency custody of Leo, claiming Emily was an unfit mother, raising a child in a toxic, hazardous, abandoned industrial site. The Pike County Courthouse was stiflingly hot, the air conditioning struggling against the late October heat. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table beside Harrison Cole, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. Across the aisle sat Greg, wearing a brand-new, expensive navy suit that he certainly couldn't afford on an insurance adjuster's salary. Beside him, sat a slick corporate litigator that Caliber Mining had quietly bankrolled. The trial was a gruesome two-pronged war. On paper, it was a custody hearing. In reality, it was a battle for $130 million. Caliber's strategy was brutally simple. If Greg won custody of Leo, he would immediately petition to take control of Emily's assets as the guardian of her child, forcing the sale of Parcel 88 to Caliber. Greg took the stand, playing the role of the concerned, heartbroken father perfectly. "She dragged our son to a wasteland, Your Honor." Greg testified, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "They live in a rat-infested trailer. She's forcing him to dig in toxic blue mud. I just want my son to have a safe, stable home. I have a beautiful house in Little Rock waiting for him." Emily felt a tear hot against her cheek. She felt like she was drowning. They were twisting her poverty, her desperation, into a weapon against her. Harrison Cole stood up, slowly adjusting his tie. He approached the witness stand with the casual, heavy gait of a bear. "Mr. Mitchell," Harrison rumbled, "that is a very nice suit. Italian wool." "Objection relevance," Greg's lawyer snapped. "I'll allow it," the judge sighed. "It's from a local tailor," Greg muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "I see. And you are a man deeply concerned with stability," Harrison said, pacing. "Yet for the past 2 years, you have paid exactly $0 in child support. Is that correct?" Greg bristled. "I had financial difficulties." "Financial difficulties," Harrison repeated loudly. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit C." Harrison handed a thick stack of bank records to the bailiff. "These are subpoenaed wire transfers to Mr. Mitchell's offshore accounts. 2 weeks ago, just 48 hours after Caliber Mining's bulldozers were turned away from my client's property, Mr. Mitchell received an anonymous wire transfer for $250,000. The routing number traces back to a shell company owned by Caliber Mining." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Greg went ghostly pale, his eyes darting frantically to his corporate lawyer, who suddenly looked very interested in his notepad. "You don't care about your son, Mr. Mitchell," Harrison thundered, stepping right up to the witness box. "You sold him out. You conspired with a hostile corporation to kidnap my client's child, just so you could steal her land." I didn't," Greg stammered, sweating profusely. "It was a consulting fee. A consulting fee for what Greg dirt farming." Harrison turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this entire proceeding is a fraudulent, malicious attempt by a third-party corporation to circumvent property law through family court. We ask that the custody suit be dismissed with prejudice, and we ask for an immediate declaratory judgment on the mineral rights of Parcel 88. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly run out of patience for corporate games, slammed her gavel. "Custody petition denied. Mr. Mitchell, you are lucky I don't hold you in contempt. As for the property dispute, the precedent is clear. The lamproite is the surface. Caliber Mining cannot extract it without destroying Mr. Stanton's home. The minerals belong to the surface estate." Emily collapsed into her chair, a ragged sob tearing from her throat. She buried her face in Harrison's shoulder. It was over. The dirt was hers. By the following spring, Parcel 88 was unrecognizable. Emily had partnered with Dr. Hastings and Arthur Gable to form Stanton Organics and Minerals. They didn't bring in massive corporate excavators. Instead, they used a precise, ecologically sound trenching system. In their very first month of sorting the weathered blue ground, they pulled out over 300 carats of rough diamonds, including a flawless 12-carat yellow diamond that sold at a private auction in Geneva for $3.2 million. But Emily didn't leave the land. She didn't buy a mansion in Beverly Hills. As the lamproite was slowly and carefully processed, Emily brought in hundreds of tons of rich, fertile topsoil to replace it. On the northern ridge of the property, she built her dream house, a sprawling, gorgeous modern farmhouse with a wraparound porch and massive windows overlooking the valley. She finally got her farm. Acres of vibrant green heirloom tomatoes, towering stalks of sweet corn, and sprawling pumpkin patches now covered the land that had once been dead-cracked earth. One warm afternoon, Emily stood on her porch, wiping dirt from her jeans. She watched Leo, now a thriving, happy 9-year-old, running through the rows of corn, laughing as he chased their new golden retriever. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, rough, blue-coated stone, the 4-carat diamond Leo had found in the dirt. She had never sold it. She had it set into a simple silver pendant that she wore every single day. It was a reminder that sometimes the things that look broken, dead, and entirely worthless are just waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig a little deeper. Emily's incredible journey proves that sometimes our greatest treasures are hidden beneath our deepest struggles. If you were inspired by her relentless fight against a corrupt corporation and her refusal to give up on her family, hit that like button. Right now, don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder to keep digging when times get tough, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories of people who beat the odds. See you in the next video.